Thanks for waiting. We're trying to get our last few panelists on. Welcome to today's third and final workshop scheduled for the purpose of updating the Marine Resources Commission's existing wetland guidelines. My name is Randy Owen. I'm the current Deputy Chief with the Habitat Management Division. To date, we've held two workshops. The first workshop, entitled Listening to Local Regulators, was held on August 26th and was attended by an estimated 94 participants. The majority of the attendees' comments during that workshop centered on defining best available science, factors for siting living shorelines, and managing the Chesapeake Bay Protection Act in conjunction with tidal wetlands management. The second workshop was held on September the 9th, entitled Minimum Standards for the Use and Development of Tidal Wetlands, and it included a discussion on the policies for managing for sea level rise and climate change. That meeting was well attended as well, with a minimum of 74 attendees. The attendees' questions and discussions centered on the on-site physical parameters that affect shoreline treatment design and need. Today's workshop is to solicit additional public input on the best management practices for the preferred shoreline approaches to shoreline types found in the Commonwealth. The need to identify shoreline management approaches was codified in the original Living Shorelines legislation passed in 2011. At that time, Senate Bill 964 and the resulting legislation established living shorelines as the preferred alternative for stabilizing tidal shorelines in the Commonwealth. More recently, Senate Bill 776 and the resulting 2020 legislation placed further emphasis on living shorelines and now requires VMRC to approve only living shoreline approaches to shoreline stabilization unless the best available science shows that such an approach isn't feasible. To help us identify what best available science means, today's workshop will examine the best management practices deemed critical for managing tidal wetlands in the adjacent riparian buffer. As you know, best management practices historically have involved methods or treatments for managing non-point source pollutants and stormwater runoff that negatively affect water quality, tidal wetlands, the ecosystem services that both tidal wetlands and the adjacent buffer provide. The national legislation that addresses riparian buffers includes House Bill 504 that, coupled with Senate Bill 776, requires BMRC to identify the minimum standards to ensure the protection of tidal wetlands. And it adds the preservation of mature trees and coastal resilience and adaptation to sea level rise and climate change. The list of activities that the State Water Control Board is directed to encourage and promote as it adopts criteria for local governments to use as they consider the development in the Chesapeake Bay preservation areas. To help us identify those best management practices for the management of tidal wetlands and the riparian buffer, we've assembled a collection of panelists from BEMS, DEQ, the Corps of Engineers, and DCR's Advisory Services, and we have currently a marine permitting consultant on the phone with us as well. We may have a marine contractor join. They include Nancy Smith with the Corps of Engineers, Justin Williams with DEQ. We have from DCRC's program both Mike Van Landenham and Aaron Wentz. We have Karen During with the Center for Coastal Resource Management. We have Craig Palyabinski with Bayshore Design is our marine permitting consultant who has probably 25 years consulting services in the Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula area. He has designed a number of sills and I believe a small breakwater or two. Lyle Burnell with BEMS Advisory Services. Later on, Jeff Watkins, a marine contractor, may join us. He's constructed as many sills as any marine contractor I know at the residential level. He works a lot in the Gloucester, Middle Peninsula area. And finally, certainly not least, Scott Hardaway, our Shoreline Studies program at BEMS. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining me today. I'm going to try to structure the workshop to open the door for public comment, and I'll call on my panelists to help me. I'm going to leave this slide up. It's really designed to be a loose agenda to help stimulate and focus our discussion on the identification of the best management practices for preferred shoreline management approaches in areas that include both tidal wetlands and the Chesapeake Bay preservation areas. And at this point, using Mike Johnson has helped me run the WebEx meeting. He can see the attendees and the list. There's a way to electronically raise your hand, or you can send in a chat saying I'd like to speak. But what I'd like to do, I'm going to ask the panelists to wait a minute. At any point during the workshop, the panelists should feel free to chime in with any comments they would have. But I'd like to start with the public. So, Mike, if you can you tell if anyone has raised their hand to speak? And I do have some focal points for discussion that relate to best management practices in both tidal wetlands and the adjacent riparian buffer, but the agenda is loose. You should feel free to speak to whatever issues or questions you may have as it relates to both the Senate Bill 776 and House Bill 504. So I'll open the floor to the audience. Mike, can you help me out?
All right. I don't see anybody yet sending me a chat, or I don't see any hands raised.
All right, folks, this is your opportunity to provide your public input on this matter. I will say that we do have an email portal address set up, accept your written comments as well. It's been in place for a number of weeks. All right, no hands yet, Mike?
I got Jay Ford. Let me
okay.
get him unmuted here. Okay, Jay Ford, you're unmuted if you'd like to redirect your question to the group.
Sure, thanks. I'm interested in some more details on how the language around sea level rise considerations in SB 776 is going to play out in reality. You know, is there going to be a guidance document, and will the SLR projections be pegged to one study or another? And I guess I'm really looking for, how does staff envision this going before the commission when there's a potential that the lifespan of a project may be impacted by sea level rise?
So I will start and ask the panelists to jump in behind me. Absolutely, we are. We will be addressing, per the mandate, the legislative mandate, that issue in our guidance document. We are required to update the existing wetland guidelines to address sea level rise and coastal resilience. Once we have, and this is the third of the public workshops, and then we will continue to welcome all your questions, all your comments, all your suggestions through that email portal. And as we strive to produce the first draft of the wetland guidelines, then we're going to put them on the street for public comment. Eventually, we'll request a public hearing before the commission, where we will present the document as far as in draft form, and ask the commission to give us permission to come back a month later or two to officially consider the document for adoption. But there will be ample opportunities for the public to weigh in on the guidance document we're developing. Obviously, any and all requests before wetland boards and the commission to treat a shoreline, the boards and the commission, and I would hope the homeowners are factoring into their design the reality of sea level rise. And I would ask if any panelists would like to follow in behind me on my attempts to answer that question. Nope, that looked like they're jumping in. So, Jay, I don't know, do you have a follow-up to your question or? Jay, can you hear us?
Hold on, I got him muted again. Let me get him off unmuted.
I'm sorry.
All right, Jay's unmuted again.
Yeah,
I'll get.
hey, I appreciate your answer. I'm not. It seems like we need to wait to see how this is written out in order to respond more fully to it. But I just wanted to flag that as something that a lot of us are paying close attention to, imagining scenarios where if sea level rise considerations were fully taken into account, there are projects that might look good today that are not going to be good in 2 decades. And I'm very interested in how the commission plans on navigating those sort of future oriented decisions in the permitting process.
Well, I completely understand that. Thank you for your comments. There's still obviously a lot of hard work that lies ahead. Unfortunately, they didn't take away my day job. We had, as many of you know, a young lady helping us with this document, and she's taking a job with outside of the agency. So I will be working on this as fast as I can to try to get the document ready. But there's a lot of work left to be done before we can get to that point. So, Mike, do you have anyone else that's raised their hand?
I've got Kevin DeVoyens. He's having issues with his sound apparently, but he did chat me a question. And the question is, does the current system address when landowners move structures from wetland jurisdiction into the riparian buffer? What's the method for coordination of the goals of the wetland regulatory program with the CBPA?
That's one reason we asked Justin to come on as a panelist. We have been with Justin, and I think Justin's well aware that there will be times when a wetlands board may disallow a structure in tidal wetlands that will potentially force the homeowner into the buffer with their suggested or desired treatment. Justin, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's part of why we are trying to make sure we are coordinated and recognize that some of the BMPs, especially as people tackle climate adaptation and resiliency measures, will require work in the RPA. And our regulatory activity is focused around just providing that framework, recognizing that more often than not, these adaptation measures will have to happen specifically there, right at the buffer and in the RPA.
Thank you, Justin. Kevin, did you have a follow-up? I know you can, at least by chat, respond.
I'm not seeing anything from him right now, but if he does chime in, I'll be sure to bring it up as soon as I can.
Okay.
I have a question from Shireen Hughes. Let
Okay.
me see if I can get her unmuted. Shireen, can you hear me?
Yes. My question was, so the living shoreline as a practice has a life expectancy for water quality benefits, but almost all the BMPs do for the Chesapeake Bay TMDLs. And I wondered if, when you think about Jay's comments about the project, what it looks like today versus 2 decades, are there going to be kind of a life of the practice expectations when planning for sea level rise?
Karen, do you mind tackling that question?
Did you say Aaron or Kevin?
Exactly.
I'll just say that for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, the DCR through Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, we turned in over 1,000 sites for those load reduction credits, and as most people are aware, the lifespan on those practices is defined as 5 years, and you got to come back every 5 years to make sure they're still functioning as designed. Those don't have to be living shorelines, and so if they're not living shorelines, it's usually a revetment or something like that, and so we know that the rock structures are going to have a much longer lifespan. But yeah, definitely those living shorelines are going to have to be examined, and the marsh, the living part of it, is going to have to be examined from a load reduction standpoint at least every 5 years.
Thank you, Aaron. And Karen, would you like to? Well, I didn't hear. Was you having audio trouble earlier? I missed what happened.
We weren't sure if you were asking for Aaron or Karen.
Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. I was asking for Karen, and Aaron jumped in, which is great. Karen, would you also like to speak to that?
I think for the life expectancy under different sea level rise scenarios will depend on the actual sea level rise as it's monitored. And 5 years is not an unreasonable time to recheck vegetation in the living habitat for not only water quality benefits, but wave attenuation and plant density, et cetera, stem density. So I think that the idea of life expectancy for different practices is a reasonable one to include in the guidelines. And it'll just be a matter of deciding what that is for each practice.
Thank you, Karen. Michael, you got any hands raised?
I've got a follow-up from Kevin. In his previous question about moving structures into CBVA, he states, I was talking more about bulkheads that become retaining walls in the RPA. And then following up to that, are people aware of the Chesapeake Bay program just yesterday approved the funding of research to look at SLR, marsh migration, and marsh resilience? If anyone wants to email him, he can send him the proposal.
So I wish Kevin could talk. Is he asking what is going to happen to at the local level if a retaining wall is requested in the RPA? Is that no way of rephrasing it?
I think that's how he's rephrasing that question, is that he's more asking about what about bulkheads or retaining walls that are being moved into the RPA, and what kind of issues those might present.
Well, as everyone knows, the Wetlands Board's jurisdiction in DMRCs over tidal wetlands is restricted to the tidal wetlands. I don't want to pick on you, Justin, and I know y'all are working on guidelines yourself. Would you like to respond to that, Justin?
I think certainly, as we go forward with the regulatory process and development, we'll be taking a look at all of these measures. One of the things that we've actually also were able to do even prior to the statutory change was get funding to engage BMRC and, the William and Mary Coastal Policy Center and VIMS to help us with technical guidance on looking at measures in the RPA, as to the specific inclusion of or addressing of bulkheads with the regulatory development. I can't speak to that just because we aren't there yet, but I think certainly that'll be an element of this as well as we go forward and work with localities looking at options in terms of measures.
Thank you, Justin. You see, Mike.
Sorry, that's all I have. That's all I have in my chat box at this moment.
No one's got their hands raised electronically?
Not that I can see, but let me scroll through the list again and make sure. Oh, I do have one now. Oh. Here. This is Carl Eason.
Carl.
Good morning. It's actually Bob Sun raised my hand. Good morning.
Well, either one of your, I guess, are you both unmuted or? Anyway, go with your question, please.
The question, there's a couple of questions that we have on it, and the first one really is, what or who constitutes best science available? That's a pretty broad term, and there's a lot of factors that go into designing a shoreline project, i.e. the homeowner's desires, wishes, the actual site conditions, and the appropriate method to try and fix, stabilize a shoreline. So the way it's worded is that it shall be part of the living shoreline unless best science available says otherwise. So who is best science available?
All right, I'm gonna start with the response, then I'm gonna open it up to any of the panelists to follow. It's kind of like Justin said earlier, you know, this document has not yet, you know, been produced for public input, but we are working with VEMS, we're working with Cs. If you think about the wetlands law, the board has to weigh a number of factors when they're trying to reach their decision. Science includes things outside of science that comes, you know, from VEMS or from Cs. It can include, I know that in Virginia Beach, I think I've heard maybe some of the other Southampton areas are starting to require PE drawings. Engineering is a science. So if an engineer is working with the homeowner for shoreline treatment, in addition to what we hear from VEMS, what we hear from Cs, what we hear from the engineer, the marine contractor, I think all of that factors into what a board is charged by statute to consider in reaching their decision. But we will be working closely with VEMS to try to answer just exactly what best available science means when we produce this document. That will certainly probably drive a lot of the discussion before the commission when we get this to at the point we're ready for the commission to adopt the updated guidance. So I'll open it up to the panelists to, if they'd like to chime in behind that.
Well, before we go to the report, Andy, I'd like to point out, we had a situation in Virginia Beach several months ago where the homeowner desired a bulkhead. The engineer said it would work best. The Wetlands Board approved it over the recommendation of them not to do it, and the Wetlands Board was overturned on that. So again, my question really becomes then, is there an ultimate authority on it from them's opinion, or are we going to look at it from a standpoint, if we have a PE that is saying this is the best for this situation, what weight or what input do they have into it?
Well, I think we all know that all decisions of the Wetland Board are appealable to the commission, which are appealable to circuit courts. We all know where the final answer lies is if it's challenged all the way to circuit court.
But the goal is not to go to circuit court application. I don't think anybody's looking to do that. I think what we're looking to see is who is the best science, because it's really not identified. And two, is there any guidance given to depth of the yards, the upland that has to be protected or allowed as upland? I mean, if I have a homeowner that has an existing bulkhead and they're going to be told, no, you cannot replace this bulkhead. In fact, you're going to bring the yard back 30 feet and slope it down to create a living shoreline. What is the thought process in how much upland is allowed to be remain to protect the structures How much of an upland yard are we going to take away in order to create a living shoreline? I see lovely pictures of places that are wide expanses, but this is a blanket statement that takes into account anything that affects wetlands. And there are lots of projects that affect wetlands that are in communities and neighborhoods that don't have the luxury of great expanses of wetlands. High elevations, bluffs, things of that nature. I just wanted to know what has been put into the thought process, because every time I attend one of these webinars, symposiums, or whatever the event, the pictures all remind me of nice properties up on the James. These are not indicative of the properties in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, yet these guidelines will impact those areas just as much.
Well, thank you for your comments. I'm going to get you to restate your question because I am going to ask the panelists to jump in.
The question really becomes, who is the best science available? We've already seen a PE overturned already. So obviously the PE who's endorsing or sealing and taking responsibility for the project is not the best science available. So who constitutes the best science available, and what design criteria, and who's liable? If he's overturned and he has to endorse a set of plans in order for the homeowner to do a project, who's liable for that design at that point?
Well, we all know that bulkheads fail, ripraps fail, living shorelines fail. So there's nothing unique about that. Anything poorly designed or improperly designed or constructed is subject to failure. These questions are the very questions we're wrestling with in developing these guidelines. So I'm going to open the floor to the panelists to see if any one of the panelists would like to respond to Bob's question.
Yeah, Randy, this is Lyle. I guess I'll start us off. Since I was the advisor on the case that you referred to in Virginia Beach, Mr. Eason, I'm with the Office of Research and Advisory Services at VIMS, and we're the office that coordinates VIMS opinions and does the site visits at request. Full disclosure, Mr. Eason raises some good questions that we're struggling with here. Not struggling, I guess, but trying to figure out. I will lay out our view as we've kind of discussed it, or I've thought about it. And, the best available science is an interesting term. The way I think that we are going to tackle this, at least initially, under discussion, is not much different than we've always tackled it. In that, we feel that as you have outlined, a lot of this is site specific. There's a lot of variables in this equation. So one of an analogy that I think is good is because there are so many factors that go in. Is a hurricane tracking model. There's like 8 or 9 of those that are used, and they do a combination of those to get a mean of those. So the best available science, at least in my mind, is not a single document. That's impossible in this situation. So with the law as it's written now, as it's, I guess, semi-interpreted, everything is a living shoreline at first now. That's what you start with. Everything is now a living shoreline. And if it's not obvious, then you walk it back from there. How can you incorporate living shoreline elements? Or how can you, what do you need to do if a living shoreline is not feasible? So that takes a very site-specific analysis of a lot of factors: wave climate, as you had said, there's going to be some bank height, bank configuration, the whole shoreline continuum. So that needs to be done, in our mind, on a site-specific basis. And we do, at least when we do a site visit, look at all of those factors before we look it in. I mean, there's drain fields close to the shoreline. There's a bank height. So, you know, without going on too long about that, and giving a chance for the other panelists to jump in and even the other participants, I'll leave it at that. I see it as site-specific, walking back about what you can and cannot do, and essentially we're looking at an engineering problem. It's not a nature problem. It's you're engineering a shoreline. So there's best available engineering. There's you know, best available many things in this that come under the umbrella of science. So with that, I'll end my comments now.
Any other panelists like to jump in? There's your chance on that question.
This is Justin. I think the only thing I would say from the CBA perspective is that we certainly recognize similarly that a lot of this is going to be driven site specifically. And that's where I think, you know, our intent is to more outline a framework for localities and property owners to be able to work within, to take measures, as opposed to, you know, dictating beyond that, because it is going to come down to the kind of both the spacing and the specifics of the site. So I think that's certainly an element that we recognize as well in our part.
And I'd kind of like to hear from you on this, because I can assure you that I guess my thoughts are that all of the factors, the site specifics, what the engineer brings to the table, what we hear from VIMS, what we hear from Cs, all of those factors are, as I understand it, going to be a requirement of the board to weigh and consider. And hopefully we will spell that out more clearly in the guidance document, that those are all factors that contribute to best available science. Mike, I guess I'd like to hear from you if you can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
That's always been kind of a balancing act, in my opinion, of the options that are available for any eroding shoreline. Quite often there are multiple options. Our goal is to review with the owner what we think are the ones that are appropriate, and also share with them the strengths and weaknesses of each of those options. Again, this is our recommendations. Our information that we provide is just one stream of recommendations that I guess the board will have to consider when they're making that final determination to approve or not approve a design. And I agree with you, Randy. How that process works hasn't been determined. It'll be a while before it is determined. And like most things, it's kind of like an onion. The more layers you peel away, the more there is to see. And I don't think we're close to a defined process on how this is going to work in the future.
Thank you, Mike. Is any other panelists that like to speak to this?
Yes, I would, Randy. This is Karen.
Hi, Karen.
As far as the VIM science, just to follow up on what Lyle was saying, and also what Mike is referring to, VIMS does have a lot of information about the science of the sites. We have a lot of maps and tools and GIS analyses that have been done to help everyone know what the nature is and what the physical processes are at a given site. So as far as providing the science for that type of site-specific analysis, there is a lot of information available for everyone to use for that purpose. And we hope that that would be something that's going to be included in the guidelines. In addition to that, there's a number of decision support tools that can be a place to start. Tools that some of the localities are already using, the decision support tool and decision trees and other shoreline management model information as a place to start with the evaluation of whether or not a living shoreline might be suitable at any particular site. So I just wanted to put that in there, just to say that as part of a number of layers of science, that those are resources that are available and will hopefully continue to be used and incorporated in the guidelines.
Thank you, Karen. In fact, I will add that in so many words, when the after the legislation was passed, we did send out a memorandum to all the local wetland boards that specifically pointed to the tool at the Institute, and as well as the information we may get in addition to that from the advisory services, from the Shoreline Studies program, and from SEAS. So I guess it gets back, Mr. Easton, Bob, to my comments that add all that up and include whatever information, there's nothing to preclude a homeowner, and I know it isn't done for free, but any information they bring to the table, if they've hired an independent analysis from a different institute that may have a scientific background, or your engineer, all that information, the board is charged with considering all that information, and as it was alluded to earlier, we're gonna have to do our job and make that clear in the guidelines that that's what we mean by best available science. I hope, Bob, Carl, did you have a follow-up? I hope that at least gives you some insight on the answer to your question. And if any other panelist wants to chime in, please do so now as well.
Well, we do have a follow-up. The way the code is written, it said it shall only protect living shoreline. That's the first issue. Second issue is when I listen to the panelists and the explanations, and every site is site specific, and that is really critical. And as somebody who's spent the last 35 years going to every site, putting boots on the ground, I don't buy that GIS is going to tell us how we can design a project at a specific site. And also getting to the idea of guidelines. There was a publication put out many years ago by someone, and I'm not going to mention the name, that put out the guidelines for living shorelines, and his recommendation was a minimum 10-to-1 slope behind the structure. So do we have a minimum slope, or are we going to slope things less than 10-to-1? Are we going to slope them at 5-to-1, 3-to-1? Are we going to look at wave climate, north facing? There's a lot of specifics that go into this, and to sit there and say shall permit only these structures, are you looking to put out a set of check this box if you're over 6 feet vertical that we have to address? Is that going to say, okay, you can look at a different structure? Are we going to say you can slope this back much steeper since it has more vertical? There's no guidance here. And as for the GIS reports that have come out, Karen, I love you, and we've worked a long time, but the reports that were being put out from GIS had lines and shoreline and lines going through the middle of piers, people's backyards. They really did not address site specifics. You really need to go to a site to look at it and determine if it's appropriate. I don't believe you can do it from a computer desktop. Never have believed that. I think that if we're going to sit there and say the best science available and not even go to the site to look at it, that's a problem. And to not even have a set of guidelines for, if you have a north-facing shoreline with a windy climate that's expected, not just from storm, but let's see, we have boat traffic through here. I've seen boat traffic pick up 3-foot waves on shorelines. So where are the guidelines coming and the things that we can take into consideration when we put these things together? Nobody wants to waste time putting together a plan for a homeowner and charge them to keep doing the plan till we find something that's nice and everybody likes it. Homeowners are paying us to protect their property. We have homeowners that want to do living shorelines, but they have sites that can handle it. If you're going to tell another homeowner who lives next door, no, you can only have this, then I have an issue with that.
I agree. That question, one thing I definitely agree on is that's why BMRC goes to all the sites. We never make a decision on a project or never bring it to the commission if we haven't got boots on the ground. So the online tools that are available are in addition to the site work you do, Bob, the site work your engineer may do, the site work that the group of advisory services may do, the site work that SEAS does. So complete agreement with you on that. And obviously the guidance is not prepared yet. We just said that earlier. That's why we're holding these work, this guidance focused. And we need those kind of comments, to help us forge this document. So one thing, Bob, I'm going to say to you and anybody on the call today in the workshop, please follow up with your comments in writing to our, well, my screen's not moving, but let's see if I can get it on the screen.
Randy.
Right there, the wetlands guidelines at MRC at Virginia.gov. Please follow up in writing. Yes, was that you, Carl?
Yeah, one observation that I made is in the language and the wording of the statute itself. It says shall permit only living shorelines. And if you look at some of the recent cases that are coming out, I mean, split is arising as to what does shall mean. Is shall a mandatory term or is shall a permissive term? And it probably would behoove someone to look at the actual drafting and the use of this word, because if you treat it as a mandatory word, shall, then you take away a lot of the discretion that I think the guidelines were intended to allow the agencies to implement. You have to have that discretion to make an appropriate decision. But if you start off with the proposition that shall is not a mandatory word, it's a mandatory word, then it removes that. So if I wish to challenge it at a later date, because VIMS may recommend X and my engineer recommends Y, and you get ultimately through the commission up to the circuit court, if you get there and the judge said shall is mandatory and they were mandated by statute to do it, then you really reduce the probability of potential challenges and the opportunity for a lively debate on the issue. So that's not a question, it's just an observation, but the observation is perhaps maybe somebody needs to go back and look at shall versus taking into consideration or something that doesn't communicate a mandatory sense to it.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. Mike, do you see any hands raised or anybody come to the chat line?
I've got a few. First is Jay Ford has been chatting some follow-up questions along this line. Then I've got Christy Everett and Pam Mason, I think, also want to chime in. So let's go to Jay Ford first. Let me get him unmuted. Okay, Jay, you're unmuted. Jay, can you hear me? Okay, Jay Ford had a comment here. It says the best available science means science. I hope people do not conflate homeowner preference with science. As a separate consideration, the word science in SB 776 was not accidental. I'm now going to mute Jay Ford back and unmute Christy Everett. Let me find her. Okay, Christy, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning.
Great. Morning. I guess I would just push back a little bit on that word science. I don't think in the legislation it's referring to a hired engineer that's on behalf of the client trying to potentially represent the client's preferred shoreline stabilization method. So I think science is based on resources that are part of the Commonwealth. I think VIMS, as Lyle mentioned and as Karen mentioned, there is a lot of scientific-based both decision-making tools, the shoreline suitability model. It's not desktop, as someone mentioned. A part of it is a desktop tool, but a lot of it is a decision-making tool that every single comment that was just made in terms of the factors that have to go into a successful living shoreline, and if it would in fact be an appropriate technique, are in that shoreline model. And that would be for someone to, obviously, as Lyle mentioned, verify with a site visit. I know C's, you all do wonderful site visits. I would think that though homeowners should need to know about this new law. And so I think I would push a little bit that it's not just a pro and the con, you can do whatever, but I think as the SB 776 indicates, it's shoreline stabilization is living shorelines unless science shows that it's not suitable. And I think that we need to reflect that on behalf of the law, that's the law as of July 1 enactment. So I do think C's could provide a great on-site verification of the tools that science has been, that VIMS has developed in terms of that science. And I think the Wetlands Board staff and VMRC staff have to go through each of these decision-making criteria based on these models to guide the decision-making in this case. But I think I disagree that it's just, the applicant can bring any material to the table, but I don't think science is referring to a paid representative of that applicant.
Thank you, Christy.
All right, I'm going to mute Christy back, and then Pam Mason. Let me find her. Okay, Pam, you're unmuted.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. So actually, Christy just closed with sort of my point. Also, having spent 25 years walking shorelines, I think that the tools that have been developed at CCRM are not solely based on geospatial data, but they actually incorporate decades of work of shoreline scientists to sort of validate those tools. And the decision tool, as Christy pointed out, actually allows an individual on the ground to make observations specific to that site. And then I guess my other comment was also to concur with Christy's observation that my understanding of the legislation is that science was supposed to represent basically honest brokers, folks that are mandated in state law to provide information, and that's a little bit different than somebody who might be hired to support a shoreline decision-making process, and it certainly adds a lot of bias to the decision-making. So something else to consider is what the drivers are behind those decisions.
Thank you, Pam. And I'm going to clarify that when I was including the engineer's analysis, that's where the bathymetry comes from. That's where the sediment characteristics come from. Those are the people that are providing certain of the data that's needed for the scientific evaluation of the site. So those are my comments on that. Mike, what do you have for additional comments from the audience?
Jay Ford said he had a mute issue, so can you hear me, Jay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Pam and Christy really did a good job summing this up, but, I think the important thing in this guidance development process is you're to provide surety for the homeowner, for the state in its stewardship of our resources, and for the contractors who are navigating the process. And so while I absolutely agree with the comments, that a hired individual representing the homeowner has every right to share that information before the commissioner or wetlands board. The idea that that would be part of the staff recommendation consideration is pretty far afield from the comparative legislation. But in order to get at this surety component, I think it's very important that the guidance document makes clear all of the organizations that are consulted in the development of the process. Obviously, with site-specific consideration, going to be nearly impossible to capture all of the nuances of the decision-making process, but applicants should know which tools are going to be used in advance and who's going to be consulted in advance. And that's something that we can provide in the guidance document. So I hope that it is captured.
Thank you, Jay. I agree with that.
All right, I've got Ben McFarland. You're unmuted.
Thank you. So, a couple of comments on this. And I'll just say I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission or my coworkers on this that are also on the line. But I think, if the legislature had intended for a specific agency or a specific model to be used and as the best available science, the law would have said that. And I think, the points that someone brought up about, that there are certain things that are on the ground that are not taken into account in these models. It's absolutely correct. And at the end of the day, it's my understanding that the best available science in determining what that is for any given case is a legislative determination by the board that can then be reviewed by the commission. But if that's the case, I think that the guidance, one of the key things that needs to be included in this guidance is some sort of process or outline of how the board is supposed to arrive at that decision and what sort of evidence and how they can justify their decision to the commission on these decisions. It is important from my perspective that we allow for people to bring in information that's of use to the board making these decisions, whether that comes from a contractor or whether that comes from VIMS or someone else. All of that information is valid, and I don't think that we should be criticizing certain parties because they are hired on behalf of the homeowner here. I mean, these folks, if they're engineers, are licensed engineers of the Commonwealth, they have ethical responsibilities, and so implying that they are just doing something on behalf of the homeowner and not actually following what those responsibilities are, I think I would hesitate to make that claim in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And I think we have an agent on the phone, Craig Pajabinsky, who has probably brought as many living shoreline designs forward as a permitting agent is other consultants I'm familiar with, and I'd ask him if he'd like to have anything to say. Craig has designed a number of successful sills and similar projects that have been constructed in the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula area. Craig, would you like to speak to the role that you as a consultant play as it relates to the design of living shoreline treatments and when they don't work?
Hello, am I there?
Hi, Craig.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at, guidance available. I mean, shoreline setup, whether it's a high bank, north-facing shoreline, the stabilized upper portion of the bank, if it's, wooded, I'm going to advise somebody to do a rock or vet mill on the toe of that bank if it's north facing, because, in order to establish a living shoreline, I might have to take a 25-foot bank and grade it back at it open. I just don't have to do that. So, I mean, each site's a little bit different. I work in a lot of areas in lower Lancaster County where it's generally low, and you don't have a lot of wooded shoreline, actually RPA right up to the shoreline. So situations like that, lead right into the design of the shoreline, breakwaters or sills in combination with beach nourishment and plantings. But it is a challenge. I mean, I had a call from a gentleman yesterday down in Matthews, and he's set up pretty well where he could do a living shoreline, but he's retired, he's on a fixed income, and he got a an estimate from a reputable contractor up here in Northern Neck, one, to do an armor stone revetment along the toe of a low bank, or two, do an armor stone sill with beach nourishment. Well, the living shoreline component costs 2.5 times that of the revetment. So, you know, he's in a position where he has to decide whether or not he's going to try to move forward with the sill, or is he, you know, going to have to sell the property instead of, you know, passing it on to his kids and grandkids. So, you know, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But I mean, I look at every site differently, and you know, I look at the exposure. I look at how much shoreline I have to deal with. You know, I work a lot on the Potomac, and Potomac's not really a place to fool around with, you know, doing low sills. If you can do breakwaters, that's great if they can afford it. But generally that leads to more longer stretches of shoreline as far as designing breakwaters. You know, most of our projects, the shorelines are maybe 100, 150 feet in length. And it's hard to design a living shoreline, just one breakwater, when everybody else around you has bulkheads and groins, and you just start mixing different designs. So, you know, in a place like that, I may just go ahead and do an armor stone revetment, because that's the best, you know, design to stabilize a shoreline. So I hope I answered your question, but that's all I have to offer.
No, thank you, Craig. Mike, who do you have from the audience next?
Henry Pollard.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. This is I just build a little bit some of the recent comments, including Carl, and kind of get to the point that we just made. There is a practicality to this that I hope is not going to get lost and needs to be reflected in guidance somehow. And I know you're working with statutory language here, but you know, at some point, the practicality of the solution to trying to protect the shoreline is going to be is just going to be a factor for the landowner, whether it's cost or time, what have you. And I guess I'm sure that whatever the guidelines are that come out, we've got to account for the fact that at some point in some situations, something is better than nothing. And something that's protective is better than the shoreline will continue to erode and contribute more sediment or other problems. So I think that, you know, and the question of cost is not apparently factored into the statute. But there is going to be a point where the science may indicate that a living shoreline is not suitable because or its long-term feasibility, if you will, is such that it won't hold up over time and that some other more awkward approach may be in fact more protective over the long run, and to prevent the shoreline from eroding or loss of real estate, if you will, into the water. So I think we've got to be in developing the guidelines. We've got to have an eye toward the practical reality of what the long-term investment needs to be, and what the landowner is willing to put into it. As was just mentioned, I mean, if you've got a situation, and I know every site's different, living shoreline will be more or less expensive, but in a situation where living shoreline is 2.5 times more expensive, or you're facing just a preliminary engineering to try to get to the application in of $10,000 to $15,000 of engineering with doing all this available science to make the case, a lot of landowners are going to say, "Forget it. I just can't afford it, or it's not worth it." And I'm either going to, as just indicated, might just the property and let the next guy deal with it, and that's the shame, because you have an opportunity to help do something to stabilize that shoreline, but we're letting it go because we have to be careful not to let the first be the enemy of the good here. Okay, and we've got to keep that in mind. And so I just want to make sure that we're being as practical in our approach as we apply the science, and keep the reality of these practical considerations in mind, and that as part of that balance as best we can. And you know, it's you just need to keep that in our in mind as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard.
I've got Bruce Julian. Let me get him unmuted.
All right.
All right, Bruce, you're unmuted. Can you hear me? All right, so Bruce wrote a comment in, maybe every project should be required to include the odds of success. Will it work? Who pays when a failure occurs? Does the designer get sued? Does the county get sued? So I think he's looking at liability for unsuccessful living shorelines.
Can you see, try again if you can get his audio working?
All right. Bruce, can you hear me? Bruce?
And for those of you having trouble, sometimes you're double muted. I don't know whether you're on your phone or whether you're on the computer, but if you're...
Bruce is showing that he's using a computer, so.
Okay. Maybe his microphone's not working or it's not turned off.
Yeah. Anyways, that was his comment anyways. Next, I'll mute him back. Next is Allison. I'm going to mispronounce your name again. I know you told me before. Allison Eichel.
Hi, it's Allison Eichel. Thank you. I wanted to kind of agree with, I really appreciate this lively discussion that we're having about kind of what the law update actually says. And I think I want to emphasize what several other people have already said and maybe point out something that I had raised before that I feel like is still being overlooked. So I agree, it says best available science, and I do really hope that the standards and the guidelines address how the board might think about what the best available science is. I think that is important. I like the fact that there are already tools available which are site-specific determinations, allow you to walk through all those different considerations and arrive at what the science would actually say, whether a living shoreline truly would work at that site or not. I think it would be good if the standards are kind of referencing that or giving the board some way of ranking that science, or understanding what it might be, what would be needed to be received to qualify as a best available. Other things, I think the discussion about suitable is also important. It says those such approaches are not suitable. I think there's definitely room in there to think about what we've heard about the length and the sea level rise, like how long it might work, what the success rate might be. There is definitely room, I think, within suitable to understand different approaches. But I think the big thing for me that I raised before, and I would like to hear maybe the Attorney General interpretation or something, but the very beginning of that sentence says the commission. People seem to be overlooking that. It says the commission shall permit. It doesn't say the boards. The local boards have an entirely different section of the law where it dictates how wetland boards can grant permits or not. And it does not say in that section of the law that the boards shall permit only living shorelines. And I think that is either a big oversight or it is something that needs to be addressed, where it says only the commission shall permit only living shoreline approaches. And again, the separate section of the law, which is 28.2-1302, addressing what the local boards do, does not have that language.
I will, yes, thank you, Allison. I'll try to address certain of your points and want the panelists to feel free to jump in behind me. But I questions of suitable and best available science, that the guys are definitely going to spend a lot of time hammering out what does that mean, so that there is guidance to the boards. And then, of course, all of this, once we get all of y'all's public, I too appreciate the lively debate. Eventually, this is going to go before the commission, and the commission will ultimately adopt a set of guidelines. And since wetland boards are charged with using the guidance document under the code, that is where we believe their direction to require living shorelines will be part of the statute. So anybody on the panel would like to jump in, please feel free. Crickets. Mike, do you have any anyone else in the audience?
Yeah, I've got Seamus McCarthy.
You'll unmute him, please.
Seamus, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good morning, Seamus.
Good morning, everybody. Just kind of weighing in. My hand's been up for a half hour, so kind of lost my train of thought. But what Norfolk always does and strongly encourages is pre-application meetings. So before, a lot of times you have consultants that meet with the homeowner wants, he has a failing bulkhead. I want to replace the bulkhead. I want to, do a riprap, and all of a sudden the JPA is submitted. So I always very strongly encourage pre-application meetings before a JPA is submitted. So a lot of times that doesn't happen because they're not required to have one. But looking at a lot of variables, the challenge of this is when you actually have a structure like an old bulkhead, a concrete wall, old kind of rubble, and looking to see, what the best solution is going to be. Before I go out to a site, I do utilize the VIMS comprehensive map viewer, but it doesn't capture all the variables. It doesn't capture where the outfall locations are and where the existing trees are, like the big historic oak trees that you can capture canopy, but not the trunk location. Impact and is there room to grade back? So I actually just had one recently, which will be going to the board in October, where the comprehensive map viewer was living shoreline from VIMS. The house is probably 50 feet from the water. The pool and the concrete pool deck is up to the failing concrete bulkhead, which and low tide's probably about a foot beyond that bulkhead. So what I did, and from a lot of people that had been working with the system for a long time, the best available science was and used to be having a VIMS assessment. So back in the day, VIMS did assessments for every project, a written assessment. So I always try to get as many people out to the site meetings as I can, always VMRC, even the initial meetings. Corps of Engineers, if they're assigned in a timely fashion, but a lot of times they're not, so we don't know who the Corps person is, to kind of shoot things around, like let's look at all the variables and see what the best solution is here. And so I just brought Emily out to that site, and we looked at it, and the best solution that she thought, which was I agree with, was to do a riprap in front of the existing bulkhead, because there was no room to grade back at all, and pushing out. There was issues with existing fetch, but also with how far out to get a 10-to-1 slope to match the existing grade would be, so that you'd be considerable amount of rock and sand to do a living shoreline in that area, with boat traffic going back and forth. So, but that's my point. To me, long time is the best available science was always a VIMS on-site assessment. But they're going to be heavily stressed to get out to all the localities they're going to asking for assessments. So
I don't agree, Seamus, that anytime that you can get people out there in a pre-application site, that's exactly what we want. I've done a myriad of them over my years of working here. In many cases, I've more recently been assigned to the Middle Peninsula area. I can't tell you how many times that Mike Van Landenham and the Essex County representative and I all met on site with the contractor, agent, homeowner to discuss the shoreline. We had technical aspects, and that included at times the representative from VIMS. It depended on the complexity of the site, and as you said, Seamus, the volume of site visits. At some point, they can only go to so many sites. And then with respect to your comments on the structure being right up behind the failing concrete wall, things can happen during a given storm that change site conditions overnight. So I can't stress enough the need for the on-site evaluation of the wave climate, the new shore bathymetry, the presence absence of SAV, all the things that factor into whether or not or what determines the appropriate shoreline treatment. Mike, what do you see for audience questions?
Seamus, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do actually. So I brought this up in the first meeting too. So this is another situation that recently happened to me. So when you actually have a failing bulkhead with water at low tide onto the bulkhead, so say there was about 4 inches of water at low tide, I went out there a couple of tides. That actually puts the bulkhead out of the Wetland Board's jurisdiction and into the VMRC's jurisdiction. So the homeowner wants to replace the bulkhead, go 2 feet out, of course, because that used to be the standard. And so the question I asked is, and then the neighbor actually has bulkhead, but that would be within the board's jurisdiction. They were built at the same time because it kind of goes around the corner and the low tide is about maybe a foot before the bulkhead. And so the question I asked in the first meeting was, is VMRC going to require a living shoreline where applicable? Because the localities have to do it on the adjoining property. So we can't, so if you have a big backyard, you can grade back into the yard. That makes sense. But is VMRC going to do that for applications that will be within their jurisdiction and not Wetland Board jurisdiction?
Okay, thanks for the question. The living shoreline is the preferred alternative in the Commonwealth. However, the legislative mandate is through the Wetlands Act. So there is not a legislative requirement. Ultimately, the commission has the say on what the final approval is for that project that would have subaqueous encroachment only.
Christy Everett had a follow-up question.
Don't think I did, no. I will just say though, since I've got the floor really quickly, just to respond to Ben's comment, I didn't mean that an engineer's information couldn't be part of the application process. I just was indicating that it's probably not the best available science as the legislature intended. So thank you though.
All right, you also had a question about when the deadline for public comment is.
Thank you. Yes, that is my question as well. I appreciate that, Mike. Yes.
And so could you restate the question, Mike? Is it the deadline for public comment, what, for the guidance document?
Yeah, what is the deadline for public comment about the process? So that developing the guidance.
Oh, okay. We haven't set that date. In fact, we couldn't even, until we go to the commission requesting a public hearing, which is, only then would for certain I don't have, we had informed Richmond we would try to have this document ready by the first of the year. We didn't anticipate losing our employee that was really tasked with this job. We're currently down 3 staff members at VMRC in our division alone. So we're working in earnest to get it ready. But I would, Ms. Everett, I would say that I would argue conservatively that at least to the beginning of next year, because ultimately we're going to get this ready, for a commission hearing at the public, and the public comment period would be open up until the date that the commission approves the document, if that helps.
You have a follow-up, Chris?
No, thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to mute you back then. Henry Pollard still has his hand raised. I'm not sure if that's just left over from earlier or not, but I'm going to unmute him to see if he does.
I had a question in the chat earlier that back in the discussion we were talking about sea level rise in particular. I guess I'll just sort of advance it here. And I guess it's just something that I think we need to consider for what is, as part of this best available science, or this question of suitability. And that is, at what point, or perhaps under which assumed sea level rise scenario that would be baked into this, would sea level rise considerations render a living shoreline unsuitable? And there's been some further discussion on that, but that was sort of the nut of that question. I guess again, going back to my point earlier, though, in relation to that, is that, you know, a landowner that's facing a substantial investment in a shoreline protection is not going to be inclined to invest in a structure that's going to be overwhelmed too soon to basically, at least in landowners might recoup the cost of that over time, or at least have a sense of, you know, yeah, I got my money out of this, or have to then have to build something new altogether, or not even be able to maintain it because it's going to be underwater, you know, or whether his kids are going to have to, or his or her kids are going to have to maintain it, not be able to maintain it because it's underwater after, you know, 15, 20 years. So I guess the question then that puts to it is, you know, which sea level rise scenario that is maybe perhaps in terms of feet of rise over a period of time would VMRC recognize for purposes of determining that it or is baked into that applicable best, science, best available science, or the best practice that would be used to determine that, which method would be suitable. So I think that's going to be coming up with that, which scenario is going to be baked into that is, I think, going to be a critical point. That was the basic question I had.
Excellent question, and it really gets to the heart of this workshop, which is the best management practices. So I'm going to start, and this time I'm not going to give them the option of not responding. I'm going to ask Lyle, Karen, Scott, Hardaway, and Mike Van Lannon or Aaron to speak to it. Whenever I'm reviewing a sill, for example, we have allowed them to be equal to the height of mean high water. We have encouraged them to design to as much as capping the sill to a foot above mean high water. Your breakwaters in the higher energy are typically the 3 to 5 feet above mean high water. Just had a project and went before the Essex County Wetlands Board the other day, and this was less about living shorelines and more about compensation for some unavoidable impacts in a marina basin, and where we had them compensate on site for the loss of vegetation, and they had to grade. It wouldn't even have survived the next tide because the plants are going to drown, and so we did not approve the compensation until they got the grade correct. You could speak even in that direction. Do you let's say you're trying to bring in in a saline area alternate flora. Do you plant it as low as mean sea level, or do you cheat towards the mean high water mark, where it typically yields all the high marsh elevation? You know, do you plan for that up front? So I'm gonna suggest that with our best management practices that the guidance document does need to speak to that very question, Mr. Pollard, that we need to be thinking about the sea level rise as it affects the health of the proposed sill or whatever planting. Could be a grading of a bank and controlling with vegetation. So Scott, Lyle, Karen, and Mike, please respond behind me.
Well, this is Lyle. I'm going to let them go first since I've already spoken. I can weigh in later.
Karen, would you like to take the first? Oh, we got somebody speaking. Go ahead.
And Scott. It's Scott as well. So sea level rise by 2050, depending on what model you look at, could be 1 or 2 feet. And that's 30 years from now. And when you design a system, you are a living shoreline system, you want it to have some ability to survive. And the issue goes back to what's been talked about all before, how site specific it is, but it's almost as simple as high bank, low bank. Because the system, the planted marsh can actually upgrade to some degree. And if you have a bank back there that's graded, then it can also migrate up the bank. But when your bank gets so high and steep that it can't do that, then what happens to the marsh? It can only grow vertically, and then there becomes a problem. And then at some point in time, you got to decide, am I going to add rock? Am I going to add sand? Do I want to go through an adaptive management process to keep my living shoreline a viable marsh in some time in the future. So the other thing that we currently have available, because when you look at this law, it has this minimum standard comment in here, which a guideline and a standard for the engineers out there are obviously two different things. The standards are much more strict view of things written down. And so what we have for each locality, currently, what are you designing your system to protect against? Sometimes your low bank situation, the 10-year event, you're flooded. And you just hope the system will be there when it leaves. But a high bank situation is different. But every locality has a FEMA report. Every locality knows what the statistical return interval for the 10, 50, and 100-year event are. So designing a system for a certain level of protection to start off with is kind of one way to approach this. And in that light, the addition of more water will combine across that profile, so you'll see what the impacts of that project will be as sea level rises. It's sort of my nickel tour.
Thank you, Scott. Karen, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Follow up with sort of the best practice guidance currently is following on what Scott is saying, is looking at today's conditions. What's today's problem that you're trying to solve? And again, that's a very site-specific question. It's based on the nature of the site and the property owner of the site. What is their concern? What is their perceived problem or real problem? And then how much space do you have? And is it vertical and horizontal space? So we're not only thinking about the current solution, but also now thinking 20, 30 years out. Do you have space to move landward or to reserve space for landward migration on the property? And in some cases, as we've heard already, there is no space. The land uses have already precluded that option. Channelward designs are not as feasible when you're going out into deeper water for sustainability of living shoreline designs. Scott's work is also showing that you can evolve marshes and sills over time. So over a 10, 20, 30-year life, you can add sand. You can raise the height of the sill. Is that something that can be incorporated into the expectations of the project at the very beginning as you're planning for the investment? To sort of speak to what the previous caller was asking about, this, the practicality and the long-term investment questions. So I think these are all real concerns. They're all valid. And I'm certain that this is all part of the intent of this legislation on both the CBPA and tidal wetlands side of the House, because the CBPA buffer area is where we would like to see some of these projects moving landward if possible in the future. So how do we address reserving that area for that purpose? The actual sea level rise, we're anticipating right now, the thought is 1 to 2 feet, but it could be more than that. We just don't know. We'll have to sort of measure and monitor as it goes along. But we do have tools. And again, I'll clarify that GIS tools are not the final answer. They're just a tool amongst others that can be used. And we do have sea level rise scenario tools that can be applied, and it's variable. It's not the same everywhere. So we can't say that if you have a low bank, all low banks are going to be the same. All marshes are not reacting the same. So we can take the science that we've learned through research and apply through these tools to help people understand what can we likely expect at any given site location with regards to sea level rise, and then how does that enter into the considerations for alternatives and evolving or adaptive management of these projects over time. Because I think that's something we're not used to. We're used to designing projects now, permitting them now, and then not having to revisit them until we go back for another permit. So we're going to have to think about this a little bit differently. And the guidance, I'm assuming, will capture a lot of these concepts.
Thank you, Karen. Mike or Aaron, I guess same question with respect to when you go out and do your Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service site visits and a homeowner is looking for the suite of solutions that you think are technical solutions to a shoreline treatment or erosion need. What factors into y'all's guidance as it relates to sea level rise and coastal resilience?
Jump in if Aaron can follow me up if he'd care to. That's something that's a discussion topic that we talk about with every owner, is with sea level rise and possibly subsidence, when you get changes in elevation, that impacts the viability of the site initially, and also how long is that viable. So it's another variable that's in that equation that the owner has to work through to determine what's the best option for him. That's the scenario that we used to go by. However, that scenario changed July 1 so that living shorelines are the option. But yeah, we talk about the resiliency part. Do you design that into the initial design, that resiliency, or do you talk about how can we address the issue when the water is high, so high that the marsh is no longer providing that erosion component? Aaron, do you have anything to add?
You know, just not directly on this topic of sea level rise, but overall that, you know, our ability to do these site visits and provide this technical assistance to the homeowners. You know, we are, I think someone commented earlier about VIMS and historically what they did and how they can't get out to every site now. Well, you know, we're there. We're able to do more than what we currently do. So that's a role we can continue to fill as more homeowners and contractors reach out to us.
Thank you, Aaron. I know there may be other people who still have questions, and I kind of hope today that some of the discussion would kind of go into an area that I have less experience in, but we have Justin on the line as a panelist. But I was wondering if we should try to ask if there are any questions from the audience that deal with best management practices in the buffer, in an area where I don't have regulatory experience and a lot of information on. But I do know, you see my little statement to the public at the bottom of the slide. We all know that the riparian buffer is hugely important for the bay and the ecosystem services within the bay that tidal wetlands provide, and overall water quality health. And a good riparian buffer helps with our hopeful, return of the submerged aquatic vegetation. We've got, we just had yesterday at the commission hearing, we had the annual report from JJ, Dr. Orth, and Dr. Chris Patrick on the SAV. We had a really wet year in 2019. SAV didn't do so well, and I know that runoff, stormwater runoff is critical to manage and protect the water quality of the bay and its tributaries. So I'm not restricting the balance. We've got about 30 minutes left on the workshop. I'm not restricting it to the buffer, but I would love to hear any questions you may have on the BMPs that are or questions you may have about BMPs in the buffer.
All right, Christy Effort raises his hand.
Sorry, go ahead. I don't think I was intentionally.
So you want us to come back to you?
I don't have a comment right now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yep. Henry Pollard.
Yeah, I just build that point of, and it ties into some stuff we've been talking to, whether we're looking at what's going to be allowed, along the shoreline or within the RPA. I think one of the key things that we need to keep in mind is to make this program, to make this successful, if you will, and in the sense of how to implement it, the landowner and the engineers are going to have some certainty of the process, but also the factors that are going to be considered and what options are going to be relatively available, if you will, and under certain, and every site's different. I get that, but there are certain factors that I think that need to be pinned down so that folks kind of have a certainty of, okay, if I go down this road, I have some certainty as to process, and that I will be able to have this thing in place and do what I think I need to do over time. I think the other issue that comes out of this, particularly when you talk about impacts in the RPA as well, is the ability of the property to be the marketability of the property going forward. If there is a concern, and I think there always is in some ways, but the degree of the concern about ongoing maintenance or adaptive management obligations that carry forward, and touch back to some of that liability question that came up earlier. If I'm a prospective buyer of a property that has these installations on it, or these improvements, what does that mean for me? So I think just understand so that for lack of a better term, the market, the private real estate market, has a sense of, okay, we know what to expect with this generally. I think that's going to be really important to give confidence to folks. So I just leave it at that.
Thank you. Mike, you see any hands raised or chat requests?
Just a few statements from Jay Ford, saying it would be great if staff could point out that resiliency is one of the main reasons living shorelines are preferred. Kevin Du Bois follows up with, isn't the goal to stabilize shoreline while preserving living shorelines? Joe Rieger asked if VMRC has a draft, when they have a draft of the guidance document, could it be shared with the group so we could give feedback on the document? He wants to be able to provide good feedback for that final document.
Yeah, I did. I discussed this morning with our chief, once the document is ready, we fully intend to make it open for all eyes to see, and we want that comment. So when we get to that point, we'll definitely, if Joe's listening, we'll definitely make sure that anyone and all has an opportunity to weigh in on it. And I think that, this is work in progress, but if I had my way, I want it to be a long public comment period. I don't think we should rush this. I'd like to see, I think the last time we updated the guidance was in the 90s, and I'd like to see a product that that any and all boards can turn to in the commission, or a judge if he has to in an appeal, to say, well, here's the guidance, and it was well vetted to the through the public process. So we fully intend to make it available. We also work with the commission. If they are not ready to act on it, they may send it back for more work.
Okay, my board's clear for the moment.
Let me ask, it's 20 minutes before the conclusion of the workshop. Do any of the panelists have anything they'd like to add at this point? We really have used you primarily to answer questions. If you have some comments you'd like to make, I'm open the floor right now to the panelists. On any and all topics that relate to either House Bill 504, 776, or in general best management practices for, managing tidal wetlands and the RPA.
Hey, Randy, this is Nancy from Army Corps.
Hi, Nancy.
Hey, I just wanted to mention that our nationwide permits are in the process of being renewed right now, and that includes the living shoreline. So a public notice will go out today from the Norfolk District asking for public comments. So I'd ask if anybody wants to review that and provide comments. We would appreciate that.
Excellent point, Nancy. You know, she sat quietly through most of the workshop, but both the state and federal governments, and so while we're accepting and looking for comments on our guidance document, clearly so is the Corps right now. So that's an excellent point, Nancy. Thank you. Anyone else on the panel?
Yes.
I'm assuming. Hi, Karen. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify a point that was made by others, and also that is a personal feeling of mine and something that we're very concerned about at the center. And all three of these public workshops, I listened to the other two and have participated in this one, for good reason, is focused on the parcel level, the permit review level. But I think it's all important for everyone to also keep in mind the resilience concept and the multiple benefits of tidal wetlands, and that tidal wetlands take up a small percentage of our estuary landscape compared to shallow water habitat and riparian buffer habitats, and that we have the charge as the community of the Commonwealth responsible for tidal shoreline management to think about not just shoreline protection for individual property owners, but the multiple benefits that tidal wetlands provide for the entire public interest. And in Virginia, we know through our research and some of the science that we've been doing at VIMS that, as I said before, the marshes are changing, and we're trying to study those changes and report those changes back out to the public so that everybody understands as best they can. And whether we can see it or understand it well enough yet, this is a changing dynamic situation that involves both the wetlands and the riparian buffer area. Right now, it's moving landward. So when you talk about sill heights in relation to mean high water, we need to understand the flooding levels and water levels today that may not be referenced to tidal benchmarks across a broader scale than just the parcel level. So I completely understand why there's a need for the guidance to address permit by permit and parcel by parcel, but we also have to keep in the back of our minds as well in the guidance this idea of the role of tidal wetlands for the entire estuary and how it benefits the entire community for our economy and other benefits for water quality that we get from the wetland resource. And I also wanted to just clarify again that VIMS recognizes there are site-specific situations where living shorelines may not be suitable. And I'm again assuming that the guidance can easily incorporate some of those parameters so that all of the localities have some sort of ideas of and factors, if not standards, of when those thresholds might be crossed. So those are just some of the clarifications that I had in my notes that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else on the panel like to have the floor? Well, we have 11:45. This is scheduled to go on till noon. Mike, do you have any remaining comments or questions from the audience?
I think Henry Pollard has his hand raised again.
Yeah, I want to agree with the previous, and I'm sorry, I missed the name of, I wasn't sure who was speaking, but I absolutely the notion of tidal wetlands being part of the overall resiliency framework, if you will, and efforts. but I think we have to recognize the economic reality is that this work is done by and large by individual landowners in as part of their interest of protecting their property, or in the sense of trying to improve on that resiliency for their property, and if it doesn't, and so if the project doesn't make economic sense to the landowner, it's not going to happen from that perspective. I mean, there may be situations where particular landowners, are well-heeled enough that they feel like, we're going to do it for purely altruistic reasons, and that's great. I mean, we want to encourage that. But by and large, these folks are going to be looking at this as a very practical consideration of what's best for my property over the long run. And so again, if it doesn't make economic sense to them to proceed, it's not going to happen. And so the question and the balancing here of the policy and the technical considerations is, how do we make sure that we're not foreclosing opportunities to gain some advantage for shoreline protection and resiliency by these landowners, create, at least allowing the opportunity for them to do what makes sense under their circumstances, okay, at that time. And again, it may not be ideal, it may not be perfect, what we'd really love to see, but it might have to be good enough at that point in time under the circumstances, or else nothing would happen and the problems, erosion or otherwise, would continue. So I just want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Anyone else on the panel and the audience that would like to speak at this time?
Ken Paulson just stresses that he hopes that we'll accept input from local board members when we have a draft document, and I'm pretty sure that we will be doing that. And then Chris Everett, I don't know if Christy Everett wanted to follow up again or not. She just sent me a chat saying she may have a comment for later. So,
well, please unmute her line now and see if she'd like, because we only have a few minutes before the workshop concludes.
Hey, Christy.
Hey, thank you. It's not a credit wolf. I actually have a comment this time. Thank you. Just in reaction to Mr. Pollard's comment, I think he was suggesting living shorelines could be more expensive, and therefore don't let the baby get thrown out with the bathwater, that if nothing is done, then you're losing that sediment and causing problems. I guess I would just also push back. I think someone mentioned before too that living shorelines are shown, many studies out there, happy to share them, that they can be more resilient to large storm events. So while someone might say this bulkhead in the site is less expensive than living shoreline, it over time will save the landowner money if they don't have to replace that bulkhead that will fail. So I would just like to make that point. Also, I will say there's lots of data out there to show it's a case-by-case basis, of course, that living shorelines are not necessarily more expensive, and sometimes the more appropriate and less expensive option. But I think I would just also encourage us to look at SB 776, that it also is a not all or nothing, that if the science determines that a living shoreline is not suitable, there is components of a living shoreline that could potentially be incorporated if suitable, if that science determines it's suitable. So it's not a hardened shoreline or just a living shoreline. There can be a hybrid. So just wanted to respond to Mr. Pollard with those thoughts.
Thank you, Christy. Mike, you want anyone else?
I do have one statement here from Whitney Catchmark. Let me unmute them. Can you hear me, Whitney?
Yeah, sorry. Let's see. I typed this in. I was just curious if VMRC and DEQ would be like supportive of creating one guidance document that kind of addresses how resiliency impacts both the CBPA buffer and wetlands jurisdictions if you had more time to do it. Because right now it seems like we've got parallel efforts.
No, we have an existing guidance document now that is required by the statute to be periodically updated, and that's going to be obviously where we're going to focus the efforts right now. Whether or not there's a opportunity for a joint document that's outside of the statutes, I'm not prepared to answer that today. but I appreciate your thoughts.
Hey, Randy, I just want to throw out some anecdotal information that I have dealing with my wetland boards and wetland board staff, where they do kind of go back and forth on, what's permissible in the CBPA and how that might affect what they're trying to do in the wetlands. So, I think it would be important for them to be able to see a guidance document from related to the CBPA stuff as well.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else on the line looking to speak?
Nope, board is clear.
I'd like to thank the audience, the panelists, for your help. It was a very lively discussion today.
I'm sorry, Carl Eason raised his hand.
Okay.
Carl, you there?
It's actually Bob's comment here that I just wanted to add on or comment on something Mr. Pollard said, because working with clients, they want to be assured when they put in a structure to save a part of their upland. They're not looking to have a structure or no structure out there that gives unlimited landward movement to the wetlands or the marshes up to their back door. And if we design a proper bulkhead and put in a proper bulkhead, they don't fail. What fails they will rot or deteriorate over time, the old timber ones. But the new ones, the vine ones, they're not going to fail when properly designed and installed. Now we can convince a homeowner that, hey, try putting this living shoreline. The question we always get is, where does it stop migrating towards my back door? And that's a question that I haven't heard addressed or answered at all. And as for cost, let me tell you, the hybrid expense or the hybrid method costs more than a regular bulkhead. We've done a couple of them in Norfolk already. The hybrid method costs more than doing a normal bulkhead. These were on canal situations. So can they be done? Of course they can be done. It used to be a board would consider the economic and environmental impacts of the project. I haven't heard that mentioned really at all, except by Mr. Pollard. What is it going to cost me? And am I ultimately going to be able to protect my backyard? A vertical structure does that. Not so sure I can say 100% I'm convinced a living shoreline. I can say it'll erode up to here, or this shoreline will protect it up to here. Don't worry about the northeast reference, and don't worry about the moon tides with the moon tides flooding over this or whatever. It's going to stay here. Just a thought.
Thank you, Bob. Mike, has anyone chimed in to respond?
Jay Ford is raising his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to try and summarize the intent, not just of the legislation, but really what the role of the Wetlands Board and the Commission here is, because I feel like we're getting off target. The obligation of the Commission is to protect the state resource here, to protect the natural resource. It's what's under consideration. There's a lot of discussion about homeowner perspectives and preferences and ideas about how long you can hold back water that are rising regardless. Those are important considerations for a homeowner advocate to make at a commission meeting. But when we're talking about the best available science, that is an inappropriate place for this information. The commission needs to have clear-cut guidelines on who they're receiving information from that everybody can look at in a transparent fashion. But it is not a process that we want to see lobbied. This is a process where we want reasonable assurance that the best outcome for resource protection is what's guiding the decision process. And I can't stress that point enough, because we can't end up with a guidance document that allows for a lobbied process. That is precisely why the commission is structured the way it is.
so advocates for their point of view can make their case to commission members.
Thank you for your comments, Mike. Anyone else hanging on the line?
No, I think that is it now. My apologies for cutting you off a minute ago.
No worries. Well, again, thank you all for your participation today. Please feel free to and make use of the email address we provided in the public notices posted on the website. I really strongly encourage that, because when we sit down to put together all the public input, that's an excellent way for me to get at your comments and your thoughts. Please take advantage of it. Thank you again. And Mike, with that, I think we'll conclude today's workshop. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists.